Marcus Thompson was not your ordinary CEO. He wasn't the kind of boss who stayed locked away in a corner office, signing papers and attending meetings. Instead, Marcus was hands-on, deeply invested in every aspect of his airline company. His rise to success hadn't been easy. He grew up in a modest neighborhood, worked multiple jobs to pay for college, and eventually built his empire from scratch. Now, decades later, his airline was one of the most respected names in the industry. But despite all the accolades, Marcus had a problem that kept him awake at night: customer complaints. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. There had been a steady increase in feedback from passengers who felt mistreated or ignored by the staff. Some complained about rude flight attendants, while others mentioned feeling neglected during their flights. These weren't minor gripes, they were serious concerns that could tarnish the reputation Marcus had worked so hard to build. As someone who believed in delivering excellence, he couldn't ignore these red flags. Something needed to change, but how could he address an issue he couldn't fully understand? Marcus decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He wanted to experience firsthand what his customers were going through. The idea came to him late one evening as he sat in his study, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. What if he went undercover? What if he stepped into the shoes of an average passenger, someone who might push the limits of patience and see how the crew responded? It was risky, yes, but Marcus thrived on calculated risks. This wasn't just about testing his employees. It was about understanding the heart of the problem and finding real solutions. The next morning, Marcus began planning his operation. First, he booked a ticket under a fake name, James Carter, for a midweek flight from New York to Los Angeles. To ensure no one recognized him, he carefully prepared a disguise. A plain baseball cap covered his salt and pepper hair, and a pair of dark sunglasses shielded his piercing eyes. He swapped his tailored suits for a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. For good measure, he carried a backpack instead of his usual leather briefcase. Looking at himself in the mirror, Marcus barely recognized the man staring back at him. He smiled faintly, knowing this transformation would be key to pulling off his plan. On the day of the flight, Marcus arrived at the airport early. He blended seamlessly with the crowd, his casual attire making him indistinguishable from any other traveler. While waiting to board, he struck up conversations with fellow passengers, subtly gathering insights into their experiences. One woman praised the airline's punctuality, saying she always chose them over competitors because they rarely delayed flights. Another man, however, expressed frustration, mentioning that he'd once been brushed off when asking for help with his carry-on luggage. Each story added another layer to Marcus's understanding of the situation. As boarding began, Marcus made his way onto the plane, taking his assigned seat in economy class. Despite owning the entire airline, he rarely flew. Coach, sitting elbow to elbow with strangers, gave him a fresh perspective. The cramped space, the hum of engines, and the buzz of pre-flight announcements reminded him of the challenges everyday travelers faced. Around him, passengers settled in, some scrolling through their phones, others chatting animatedly. Marcus took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the role he was about to play. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Pretending to be difficult wasn't in his nature. He valued honesty and respect above all else. But he also understood that leadership sometimes required stepping outside your comfort zone. If he wanted to uncover the truth, he had to commit fully to the act. With the plane now taxiing down the runway, Marcus glanced out the window, watching the city shrink beneath him. The experiment was officially underway. For the first hour of the flight, Marcus remained quiet, observing the dynamics between the crew and passengers. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, handing out drinks and snacks. Most interactions seemed polite enough, though Marcus noticed subtle signs of tension. One attendant sighed audibly when a passenger asked for a second cup of coffee. Another rolled her eyes after being questioned about the Wi-Fi connection. These small moments intrigued Marcus. They hinted at underlying frustrations, the kind that could boil over if provoked. By the time the seatbelt sign switched off, Marcus felt ready to begin his test. He pressed the call button above his head, not once but twice in quick succession. When a flight attendant finally approached, he greeted her with a forced smile. "Excuse me," he said, his tone deliberately abrupt. "Can I get some water?" She nodded and returned moments later with a small plastic cup. Marcus examined it skeptically before speaking again. "This is barely half full. Can you fill it properly?" The attendant hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his demand. "Sir, we're required to serve water in these cups for safety reasons," she explained, her voice tinged with irritation. Marcus leaned back in his seat, feigning dissatisfaction. "Well, I'm paying for this flight, and I expect better service than this." The words hung in the air, drawing curious looks from nearby passengers. The attendant muttered something under her breath as she walked away, leaving Marcus to process the interaction. Over the next hour, Marcus continued his charade. He flagged down another crew member to complain about the temperature of his coffee, insisting it was too cold. When offered a replacement, he shook his head dramatically, claiming it was still unsatisfactory. At one point, he loudly questioned why the meal options were so limited, comparing them unfavorably to those of rival airlines. Each complaint elicited a mix of reactions. Some crew members remained calm and professional, while others visibly struggled to mask their annoyance. What fascinated Marcus most was the ripple effect his behavior created. Several passengers nearby started whispering among themselves, some siding with him. "He has a point, the food isn't great," and others rolling their eyes at his antics. One elderly woman sitting across the aisle leaned over to her companion and whispered, "If he doesn't like it, maybe he should fly private." Marcus heard the comment, but didn't react. Instead, he filed it away as part of his observations. Every reaction, every muttered remark, painted a clearer picture of the delicate balance between customer expectations and employee patience. Despite the growing tension, Marcus remained composed. Inside, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt guilty for causing unnecessary stress for the hard-working crew. On the other hand, he knew this exercise was necessary to expose weaknesses in the system. As the plane cruised toward its destination, Marcus braced himself for the final phase of his experiment. He had seen plenty already, but the true test of professionalism and humanity was yet to come. As the flight progressed, Marcus continued his act with increasing intensity. His goal wasn't just to annoy the crew, it was to push their limits and observe how they handled stress, frustration, and conflict. He wanted to see if they could maintain professionalism even when faced with a challenging passenger. But as he escalated his behavior, the atmosphere on the plane shifted noticeably. What started as mild irritation among the crew soon turned into palpable tension. Marcus pressed the call button again, this time more insistently. When a flight attendant approached, he leaned forward in his seat, adopting an exaggerated look of dissatisfaction. "Excuse me," he said, his voice louder than necessary. "I asked for coffee 10 minutes ago, and it still hasn't arrived." The attendant blinked in confusion, glancing at her cart. "Sir, I served you coffee earlier," she replied cautiously. Marcus shook his head dramatically. "No, you didn't. Or maybe you did, but it was cold and barely drinkable. Either way, I'm not happy." The attendant hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. She glanced around, perhaps hoping another colleague might step in to diffuse the situation. Instead, she forced a tight smile and promised to bring him a fresh cup. As she walked away, Marcus noticed her shoulders slump slightly, a subtle sign of exasperation. He felt a pang of guilt, but reminded himself that this was part of the experiment. If he backed down now, he wouldn't get the answers he needed. When the attendant returned with a new cup of coffee, Marcus inspected it carefully before taking a sip. Then, with deliberate slowness, he placed the cup back on his tray table and sighed loudly. "This is worse than the last one," he declared, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Are you sure this is even coffee? It tastes like watered-down dish, soap." A few passengers nearby snickered while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. One man sitting behind Marcus muttered under his breath, "Give it a rest already." The flight attendant's patience was visibly wearing thin. Her jaw, tightened as she forced herself to remain polite. "Sir, I apologize if the coffee doesn't meet your expectations. Unfortunately, we only have one type available on board. Is there anything else I can assist you with?" Marcus crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back in his seat, pretending to think deeply. "Well," he drawled, "you could try actually listening to what I'm asking for instead of brushing me off." By now, the tension had spread beyond just Marcus and the crew. It permeated the entire cabin. Passengers who had initially sympathized with Marcus began to grow restless. A young woman seated 2 rows ahead turned to her companion and whispered, "He's being ridiculous. Why doesn't he just let it go?" Another passenger chimed in, agreeing that Marcus's behavior was disruptive. Yet some defended him, arguing that paying customers deserved better service. The divide among the passengers reflected the broader challenge Marcus faced, balancing high standards with realistic expectations. Determined to keep testing the crew, Marcus moved on to other grievances. After finishing, or rather refusing, to finish his coffee, he flagged down a different flight attendant to complain about the cleanliness of the cabin. "Look at this," he exclaimed, pointing to a tiny crumb on the floor near his feet. "How hard is it to keep things clean? Do you expect us to sit in filth for 6 hours? The attendant knelt down to inspect the area, looking perplexed. "Sir, I'll make sure this is cleaned up immediately," she said, retrieving a small handheld vacuum from her cart. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. "It's not just this spot," he continued, gesturing vaguely around the cabin. "Everything feels dirty. And why are these seats so uncomfortable? Don't you care about your passengers' comfort?" By this point, several passengers were openly glaring at him. Some rolled their eyes, while others buried their faces in books or headphones, trying to block out the commotion. Even the children on board seemed quieter than usual, sensing the unease in the air. The breaking point came when Marcus decided to tackle the in-flight meal service. When the trays were distributed, he examined his food with exaggerated scrutiny. Picking up a fork, he poked at the chicken breast skeptically. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked no one in particular. "It looks like something my dog wouldn't eat." This comment drew audible gasps from nearby passengers. One older gentleman leaned over and said sternly, "That's enough. Stop causing trouble." Ignoring the remark, Marcus called over a senior flight attendant, someone who appeared to be in charge of the team. "I need to speak with whoever's responsible for this mess," he demanded, gesturing to the tray. The attendant, a tall woman with sharp features, approached him with a strained smile. "Sir, I understand you're unhappy with your meal, but nothing," Marcus interrupted, raising his voice slightly. "This isn't acceptable. You're charging people hundreds of dollars for a ticket, and this is what you serve them. I've eaten better meals in a school cafeteria." The cabin fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding confrontation. The flight attendant's expression hardened. For a moment, she stared at Marcus, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without warning, she snapped. "Sir, we're doing our best," she said sharply, her voice rising above its usual professional tone. "If you have such high standards, maybe you should fly private next time. We don't have 5-star restaurants at 35,000 feet. Her words hung in the air, shocking both Marcus and the surrounding passengers. For a brief second, everyone froze, unsure of what would happen next. Marcus felt a surge of mixed emotions. Part of him admired the flight attendant's boldness. She'd clearly reached her limit. But another part of him recognized that this was exactly the kind of response he'd been looking for. Losing composure in front of passengers undermined the airline's image of professionalism. Still, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of respect for her honesty. The incident didn't end there. As the flight attendant stormed off, another crew member muttered something under her breath while passing by Marcus's seat. Though her words were too faint to hear clearly, her body language spoke volumes. She avoided eye contact, her movements stiff with frustration. Marcus noted how the rest of the crew seemed to avoid interacting with him altogether, likely fearing further escalation. Despite the growing hostility, Marcus maintained his composure. Inside, however, his mind raced. He had seen everything he needed to see: the cracks in communication, the lack of empathy, and the simmering resentment among the staff. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of deeper systemic issues within the company. As the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, Marcus sat quietly, reflecting on the past few hours. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. Once the plane landed, he would reveal his true identity, and the consequences would ripple far beyond this single flight. As the plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, Marcus sat in his seat, watching as the other passengers eagerly unbuckled their seatbelts and retrieved their belongings from the overhead compartments. The energy in the cabin was a mix of relief and anticipation, relief that the flight was over and anticipation for whatever awaited them on the ground. But Marcus wasn't ready to leave just yet. He waited patiently, letting the crowd thin out before making his move. His heart pounded with a mixture of nerves and determination. This was the moment he had been building toward, the moment when his disguise would drop and the truth would come to light. Once most of the passengers had disembarked, Marcus stood up and walked slowly toward the front of the plane. By now, only a handful of crew members remained, tidying up the cabin and stowing away supplies. They were clearly exhausted, their faces pale and drawn after dealing with what they thought had been an exceptionally difficult passenger. Marcus stopped near the galley, where the senior flight attendant who had snapped at him earlier was organizing cups and napkins. She glanced up briefly, then did a double take, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him, or rather, as she realized something about him seemed familiar. Before anyone could say a word, Marcus removed his baseball cap and sunglasses, revealing his face fully. For a split second, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on everyone in the cabin. Then, one by one, the crew members froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to outright panic. The senior flight attendant dropped the stack of cups she had been holding, scattering them across the floor. Another crew member whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, her hands flying to her mouth. It was clear they had figured out who he was. "Good afternoon," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm your CEO." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating through the nearly empty cabin. The crew stared at him, their faces pale and their eyes wide with disbelief. No one moved or spoke for several long seconds. Finally, the senior flight attendant took a hesitant step forward, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. "Mr. Thompson, sir, we didn't know it was you," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, if we had known." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus held up a hand to stop her, his expression unreadable. "There's no need to explain," he said evenly, though his tone carried a weight that made everyone flinch. "What I witnessed today was unacceptable. Each of you failed to maintain professionalism even when provoked. You argued with a customer, dismissed concerns, and allowed frustration to dictate your actions. This isn't just about me. It's about every single person who flies with us. Our customers deserve respect, no matter how challenging they may seem." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their guilt written all over their faces. Some looked down at their feet, while others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. One younger flight attendant, visibly shaken, began to cry softly. Marcus noticed but didn't soften his stance. He knew this moment was crucial, not just for the individual standing before him, but for the entire culture of the company. "I've always believed that leadership means leading by example," Marcus continued, his voice firm but measured. "And today I wanted to understand firsthand what our customers experience when they fly with us. Unfortunately, what I saw was far from the standard we claim to uphold. We pride ourselves on exceptional service, yet today, you let everyone down, including yourselves." By now, word of Marcus's presence had spread beyond the cabin. Ground staff and supervisors waiting near the gate caught wind of the situation and rushed aboard to see what was happening. The sight of their CEO standing among the crew, delivering a stern lecture, left them stunned. Phones were pulled out discreetly, capturing photos and videos of the scene. Within minutes, news of the incident began circulating online, sparking debates and discussions across social media platforms. Back in the cabin, Marcus turned his attention to the wider group that had gathered. "This isn't just about one flight or one crew," he announced, addressing everyone present. "It's about accountability. Every interaction matters. Every passenger deserves to feel valued and respected. Today I reminded my team of that truth, and I'll continue reminding them until it becomes second nature." With that, Marcus delivered his final blow. Effective immediately, the entire crew will be suspended pending further investigation. Gasps erupted from the group, followed by murmurs of disbelief. The crew members looked at each other, their faces pale with shock. A few protested weakly, insisting they hadn't meant any harm, but Marcus remained resolute. He understood that drastic measures were sometimes necessary to drive home the importance of professionalism and empathy. As the reality of the situation sank in, the atmosphere grew tense. Passengers lingering near the gate strained to catch glimpses of the unfolding drama, snapping photos and recording videos. Social media lit up with reactions. Some praised Marcus for taking bold action, calling him a visionary leader unafraid to hold his employees accountable. Others criticized him, accusing him of being overly harsh and setting an unrealistic standard. The debate raged on, with hashtags like #3CEO exposed and airline drama trending within hours. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Marcus felt a strange sense of clarity. He knew his decision would spark controversy, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Leadership wasn't about popularity. It was about making tough choices that aligned with your values. And for Marcus, those values centered on respect, integrity, and excellence. As he stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, he couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. The experiment had been a success in terms of uncovering weaknesses, but it had also highlighted the need for systemic change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Marcus was ready to face it head-on. For the crew, the aftermath was devastating. Suspended without pay and facing potential disciplinary action, they grappled with embarrassment and regret. Many wondered if they'd ever regain their jobs or their dignity. Yet amidst the turmoil, some found a silver lining. The incident forced them to confront their own shortcomings and consider how they could improve. For Marcus, this was the ultimate goal, not punishment, but growth. As he walked away from the plane, he resolved to use this moment as a catalyst for transformation, not just within his airline, but within himself as a leader. The fallout from Marcus Thompson's dramatic reveal and decision to suspend the entire crew rippled far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. By the time he returned to corporate headquarters, news of the incident had exploded across social media, traditional news outlets, and even industry forums. The story dominated headlines. "CEO goes undercover, suspends crew in shocking move," read one headline. Another proclaimed, "Passenger or provocateur, Black CEO tests his own airline and doesn't like what he sees." Opinions were sharply divided. Some hailed Marcus as a bold leader willing to take drastic action to uphold standards, while others accused him of being overly punitive and setting an impossible bar for employees. Inside the company, reactions were equally mixed. Senior executives gathered in the boardroom for an emergency meeting, where tensions ran high. Some members of the leadership team praised Marcus's actions, arguing that they sent a powerful message about accountability. "If we want to maintain our reputation for excellence, we have to hold ourselves to the highest standards," said one vice president, nodding firmly. Others, however, expressed concern. A human resources director raised her hand hesitantly before speaking. "While I understand the intent behind this move, suspending an entire crew without considering individual circumstances could damage morale. People will feel like they're being punished unfairly." Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. He appreciated the diversity of opinions but remained steadfast in his belief that decisive action was necessary. "This isn't about punishing individuals," he clarified, leaning forward slightly. "It's about sending a message not just to the crew involved but to everyone in this company. We can't afford to let complacency creep into our operations. Every interaction matters and every passenger deserves respect. If we lose sight of that, we risk losing everything we've worked so hard to build. Despite his conviction, Marcus knew he couldn't ignore the potential backlash. Public perception was critical, especially in an era where social media amplified both praise and criticism. To address the growing debate, Marcus decided to issue a public statement. Sitting down with the communications team, he carefully crafted a message that balanced transparency with empathy. Today, I took an unconventional step to better understand the challenges faced by our customers and employees, the statement began. What I discovered was unacceptable. Our staff failed to demonstrate the professionalism and compassion we promised to deliver. While this was a difficult decision, it underscores my commitment to ensuring that every passenger feels valued when they fly with us. The statement went viral almost instantly, sparking heated discussions online. Supporters applauded Marcus's dedication to quality and accountability. Finally, a CEO who walks the walk, one commenter wrote on Twitter, "If you're going to charge premium prices, you'd better provide premium service." Others, however, questioned whether Marcus's methods were too extreme. "Suspending the whole crew is excessive," argued another user. "People make mistakes under pressure. Shouldn't we focus on training instead of punishment?" Amid the whirlwind of reactions, Marcus turned his attention inward. He knew the suspension was only the first step. Meaningful change required more than disciplinary action. Over the next few days, he met with key departments to brainstorm solutions. One idea quickly gained traction: mandatory training programs focused on conflict resolution, empathy, and de-escalation techniques. These sessions would be designed not only for flight attendants but for all customer-facing staff, including gate agents, pilots, and ground crew. Additionally, Marcus proposed creating a feedback loop where passengers could share their experiences directly with management, ensuring concerns were addressed promptly. To further rebuild trust, Marcus launched an initiative called Fly with Respect. The program encouraged employees to submit stories of positive interactions with passengers, highlighting moments of kindness, patience, and exceptional service. Each month, standout submissions would be recognized publicly, with rewards ranging from bonuses to special shout-outs in company newsletters. The goal was simple yet profound: to shift the narrative from fear of failure to celebration of success. But perhaps the most challenging task lay in addressing the suspended crew. While some executives suggested terminating their employment outright, Marcus disagreed. He believed in second chances, if they were earned through reflection and growth. In a private meeting with HR, he outlined a plan to invite each crew member to sit down with him personally. These conversations would serve two purposes: giving them an opportunity to explain their actions and helping them learn from their mistakes. When the day arrived for these meetings, Marcus approached them with a mix of firmness and compassion. One by one, the crew members filed into his office, their faces etched with anxiety. Marcus greeted each of them warmly, offering a seat and a glass of water before diving into the discussion. "I want to start by saying that I don't enjoy making decisions like this," he began, his tone measured but sincere. "But as your CEO, it's my responsibility to ensure that our values are upheld. Today I need to hear from you. How did we get here, and what can we do differently moving forward?" The responses varied. Some crew members admitted feeling overwhelmed by the demands of the job, citing long hours, low pay, and insufficient support from supervisors. Others acknowledged lapsing into frustration during stressful situations, promising to work harder on maintaining composure. A few broke down in tears, expressing remorse for letting their emotions get the better of them. Marcus listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering guidance where appropriate. By the end of the meetings, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. While the incident had exposed flaws in the system, it had also opened doors for improvement. He realized that many of the issues stemmed not from bad intentions but from systemic pressures that needed addressing. With this insight, he announced plans to review staffing levels, increase wages for frontline employees, and implement wellness programs to reduce burnout. These changes wouldn't happen overnight, but Marcus was committed to seeing them through. As weeks passed, The initial shock of the suspension began to fade, replaced by cautious optimism. Employees who had initially feared retribution found themselves inspired by Marcus's willingness to listen and adapt. Passengers, too, noticed subtle improvements in service. A warmer smile here, a more patient response there. Slowly but surely, the airline started to rebuild its reputation. For Marcus, the experience was transformative. It reinforced his belief that leadership wasn't just about authority, it was about connection. By stepping into the shoes of his customers and employees, he had uncovered truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. And though the journey ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, Marcus felt confident in his ability to lead with integrity, empathy, and resolve. After all, true leadership wasn't about avoiding controversy. It was about navigating it with grace and purpose. The weeks that followed Marcus Thompson's bold experiment were a whirlwind of activity, reflection, and transformation. What began as a single undercover flight had evolved into a pivotal moment for the airline, reshaping its culture, policies, and even its public image. For Marcus, it was a period of both triumph and humility, a time to celebrate progress while acknowledging the work still ahead. One of the first visible changes came in the form of the new training programs. Dubbed Service with Heart, these workshops became mandatory for all employees who interacted with passengers, from flight attendants to ground staff. The curriculum focused on 3 key areas: empathy, conflict resolution, and stress management. Role-playing exercises allowed participants to practice handling difficult situations, such as dealing with irate passengers or managing overcrowded cabins. Trainers emphasized the importance of staying calm under pressure and finding solutions that left customers feeling heard and respected. Marcus made sure to attend several of these sessions personally, not as an authority figure, but as a participant. He wanted to show solidarity with his team and demonstrate that learning was a shared responsibility. During one session, he joined a group role play where employees practiced responding to a passenger complaining about delayed luggage. When it was Marcus's turn to play the part of the passenger, he leaned into the role with humor and authenticity, eliciting laughter from the room. But when he switched back to being the listener, he offered constructive feedback, encouraging the trainees to focus on active listening and genuine apologies. His presence helped break down barriers, making the experience feel less like a lecture and more like a collaborative effort. Beyond training, Marcus introduced structural changes aimed at easing the pressures faced by frontline staff. After hearing from the suspended crew about their struggles with long hours and inadequate support, he worked closely with HR to review staffing levels. Additional hires were approved to reduce workload during peak travel seasons, and scheduling systems were revamped to ensure fairer distribution of shifts. To address concerns about compensation, Marcus announced a modest pay increase for entry-level positions, along with enhanced benefits like mental health resources and flexible schedules. These moves weren't just about improving morale, they were about showing employees that their well-being mattered. The Fly with Respect initiative also gained momentum, becoming a cornerstone of the company's renewed commitment to excellence. Employees enthusiastically submitted stories of positive interactions, many of which highlighted small yet meaningful gestures. One flight attendant shared how she comforted a nervous child by giving him a sticker and a kind word, turning what could have been a stressful journey into a pleasant experience. Another gate agent recounted helping a stranded traveler find alternative flights after a cancellation, going above and beyond to ensure they reached their destination safely. Each story was celebrated internally, with winners receiving bonuses, gift cards, or personalized notes of appreciation from Marcus himself. The program fostered a sense of pride among employees, reminding them that their efforts truly made a difference. Publicly, the airline's reputation began to recover. Passengers noticed improvements in service quality, with fewer complaints about rude staff and more compliments about attentive care. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, many of which mentioned specific employees by name. One viral post featured a photo of a handwritten thank you note left by a passenger on their seat tray, praising the crew for their kindness during a turbulent flight. Such moments reinforced the message that Marcus had been striving to convey. Every interaction mattered, no matter how small. Yet despite the progress, Marcus knew there would always be challenges. No company was perfect, and no leader could anticipate every issue. What set great organizations apart, he believed, was their ability to adapt and grow. That's why he established quarterly town hall meetings where employees could voice concerns directly to senior leadership. These open forums created a safe space for honest dialogue, allowing teams to flag problems before they escalated. Marcus attended every session, taking notes and promising follow-ups. He often joked that running an airline felt like hosting a never-ending family reunion, chaotic at times but ultimately rewarding. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how much he had learned, not just about his company, but about himself. Going undercover had been a risk, one that required stepping outside his comfort zone and confronting uncomfortable truths. It forced him to see the world through someone else's eyes, to feel the frustration of a neglected passenger and the exhaustion of an overworked employee. In doing so, he discovered that leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about understanding people. The suspension of the crew remained a controversial topic, even months later. Some critics continued to argue that Marcus's approach had been too harsh, while others praised him for holding his team accountable. For Marcus, the decision wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability and growth. By suspending the crew, he hadn't intended to shame them but to create a teachable moment. And in the end, those same individuals returned to work with renewed purpose, having reflected on their actions and committed to doing better. As the year drew to a close, Marcus stood on stage at the company's annual gala, addressing hundreds of employees gathered to celebrate their achievements. Clad in a sharp suit, he spoke with warmth and sincerity, thanking everyone for their hard work and resilience. "This past year has taught us something invaluable," he said, pausing to scan the room. "It's shown us that true success isn't measured by profits or accolades. It's measured by the connections we build and the lives we touch. Every day, you have the power to make someone's journey smoother, brighter, or simply more bearable. Never underestimate the impact of a smile, a kind word, or a listening ear." His words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. As Marcus stepped off the stage, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for his team, for the lessons learned, and for the opportunity to lead with integrity. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he was confident in their ability to navigate whatever lay ahead together. In the months and years that followed, Marcus's story became a case study in leadership courses around the world. Business schools debated whether his methods were innovative or extreme, while industry leaders cited his actions as proof that accountability and empathy could coexist. For Marcus, though, the legacy wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about leaving behind a company and a culture that prioritized people over profits, compassion over convenience. And so, as planes took off and landed, carrying passengers to destinations near and far, Marcus knew one thing for certain: the heart of any business beats strongest when fueled by respect, understanding, and a relentless pursuit of excellence.